Good morning, afternoon, night, evening, whenever this is. Greetings, not legal advice. Like, subscribe, share, comment, share with animals. Today I'm going to do a very different kind of video, non financial, I guess indirectly non financial. And you can see by the title, it's somewhat of a different title, and it'll make sense once I get into it. Before I start, three quick points. The NSA, finally a government organization that will actually listen to you. A voter was contacted by a pollster. She was asked if she was going to vote for a particular candidate. She replied, if that particular candidate wins, I'm going to kill myself or leave the country. The pollster replied, then I'll mark you as undecided. And last but not least, when asked if they would have sex with Bill Clinton, 80%, 86% of women in DC said, not again. So I expect that the reason I'm doing this is I was compelled by the protests or protesters, and I was compelled by seeing comments regarding Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is of Jewish birth, as I am, even though I'm not a religious person per se, but that's my background. So we share a common background. Bernie Sanders is a socialist. I'm not. I would say I'm an independent, and he has very different views than I have. And I was wondering why that was. And so that intrigued me. And then the protesters also intrigued me in terms of what they knew and how sophisticated they were, et cetera. So I expect that, and this is related to the current college protests, et cetera. I expect very few protesters have any idea about Hamas. And why is Hamas even relevant in the ongoing protests? Why does it make a difference? It's relevant because the Palestinian think tank, and it's called PCPSR, and it's called actually the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, which has been conducting polls in the West Bank and Gaza for many years, is located in Ramallah, where Yasser Arafat used to be located, and took a poll after the 10/7 2023 attack by Hamas. And from that date to the current time, based upon polling in both the West Bank and Gaza Strip multiple times since October, and I think the last polling referenced April of 2024, the numbers have been consistent that somewhere between 71 to 72% of Palestinians support the attacks on 10/7/23, and slightly higher number support Hamas. So, and in reality, there's no real leadership in the West Bank. The current leader, Mahmoud Abbas, is deemed to be very weak and cannot compete against Hamas, as a matter of fact. So all those protesters out there who were supporting what they thought was a noble cause, and maybe a noble cause on behalf of the Palestinians, they have to also accept the fact that those same people support a terrorist organization. And why do I call it a terrorist organization? Because it was designated as a terrorist organization on October 8th of 1997. When I saw that date, by the way, I wondered if that date was related to the 10/7/2024 attack. And if you approve and blindly protest, you have to take into account that you are supporting people who support Hamas's attacks on 10/7. That should give everyone pause, whether you feel that the cause is righteous or not, but it has to be called out. And I doubt that the protesters know this. So Hamas was funded or founded as an outgrowth of the Muslim Brotherhood, also deemed a terrorist organization by many. It has a charter a 1988 charter. I'm sure the protesters are very familiar with the 1988 charter. It encourages armed resistance, states that Israel will exist until Islam invades it, asserts the proposition of the desert to the sea, and of a single Palestinian state to the exclusion of everything else. At best, and I urge anybody, look at the charter, the 1988 charter. It has various articles. Focus on Article 7, for example, when you get a chance to look. But make your own decision. Take a look at the charter, see what it says, look at commentary, look at historical interpretations, and judge accordingly. I think that when you look at the charter, notwithstanding the activities of October 7th, the heinous acts, so let's ignore that, but just look at the charter. At best, it calls for ethnic cleansing openly, and on a more aggressive take, you could interpret it as calling for the genocide of Jews. Again, if that's okay with you and you're going to protest, okay, you should take that into account. That's what you're also supporting. Besides supporting the poor people that are impacted by the events in Gaza, you're also supporting the people that support these terrorists. They both exist. So at best, you could say, as the charter calls for ethnic cleansing, and I've heard that claim in the reverse, and at worst, it's genocide. And Article 7 of the Hamas charter, which I just referred to, does not refer to killing Israelis. It refers to killing Jews. And again, this is from 1988, so Israel was already in existence for 40 years. So Hamas, by its nature, embraces violence, has been in charge of Gaza since 2007, and look where it is today. So has it really helped the poor Palestinians who reside in Gaza? I'll let you draw that conclusion. So the summary is the protesters are supporting those who support armed resistance, a terrorist organization that openly says to kill Jews and eradicate Israel. And the poor people that the protesters support, per the Palestinians' own polling agencies, support this. So you can imagine that, notwithstanding my sympathy for the innocents who are impacted and misled by these terrorists, and if you knew me, you know that I am ambivalent about what is going on there, feel very deeply sorry for those innocents who get involved. But my sympathy only goes so far if they support terrorism. And that's notwithstanding, I dislike the Israeli government too. So that's part of the picture. But I have no patience or sympathy for the privileged squatters. Now I'm referring to the protesters supporting Hamas's goals. Yeah, are they just too stupid, too blind, misled? I don't know. I understand supporting the cause, but understand what you're supporting. I wouldn't be supporting the Taliban. I wouldn't be supporting Al Qaeda, notwithstanding whatever. So that brings me to Bernie Sanders. So Bernie Sanders was one of 3 Democratic senators who voted against the aid bill to Israel. And I understand there might be reason to vote against it. Like I said, to say I'm not a huge fan of the Israeli government is an understatement. But I was wondering what the basis of his vote was. And again, he is of Jewish background. I am of Jewish background. He's not religious. I'm not particularly religious. He's a socialist. I mean, an admitted socialist. That's his stance. He's proud of that. I would say, an independent. And I've grown to be an independent over time. So we kind of come from the same post, and I'm going to kind of go through this to see how it we somehow diverged. I went to UCLA, which was unfortunately had its protests too. Undergrad. I started there in 1976. In 1976, I took a poli sci. I majored in poli sci probably for a quarter. I took the introductory poli sci, and I remember, and it was not even hidden; it was just accepted that all the TAs, and there were a lot of teachers' assistants in poli sci, were Marxists, and that was kind of what you accepted. It wasn't a big deal, but it was known, and that was the bent of the scholastic background there. And I think it still continues today. So when the protesters are protesting, I think they're influenced somewhat by the political influences of the professors and TAs that may not have standard views of the world, America, politics, geopolitics, etc. So, but I came from that background, but I didn't become a Marxist or a socialist. I guess Bernie Sanders was influenced differently. Anyway, so recently, when Sanders voted no, a Jewish congressman from New York, I think Congressman Moskowitz, called out Bernie, and he basically intimated that Bernie was anti Semitic. Maybe that's over the line, but that's what he intimated. I don't think he said it directly, but certainly indirectly at best. And that made me wonder why some Jews question Bernie Sanders' intentions, as I do. I wonder how he got to the point where he seems to be adverse to Jewish people. Honestly, that's the way it feels like to me. So he's called out, and the great Jewish supporter AOC comes to his defense and said it was shameful because Senator Sanders' family was killed in the Holocaust, which led me to question how come Sanders, who apparently lost family in the Holocaust, and I, who lost, or my parents, and obviously indirectly I, lost almost all family in the Holocaust, how we ended up so differently. If nothing else, it demonstrated that Jews are different and that they shouldn't be treated as a single group, just like the protesters now were directed and were trying to intimidate Jews, American Jews, who are not Israelis. I don't know if there's a distinction. So there's a distinction between Israeli and Jews. All Israelis, or most Israelis, I guess 75% of Israelis are Jews, but not all Jews are Israeli. So treating all Jews the same would be an example of prejudice. So the protesters who acted in that manner, I think, were acting, besides everything else, were acting with prejudice by asserting everybody was the same. By the way, I didn't attack any of the protesters directly for supporting Hamas. They're not directly involved. To me, that's the equivalent, the flip side of that. So AOC supports Bernie and says, his family's been killed in the Holocaust. So that made me think. And what did it make me think? Thought about his background, and I looked into his background. So his parents were Americans. So his father came to this country in 1921 from what is now Poland. He suffered from anti-Semitism. So this is 1921. He was, I think, like a late teen, like 18, his father, and he left and came to the United States. He settled in New York, 1921. His mother was born in the United States. So by the time the war came, some 20 years later, his family was disconnected physically from the war and the Holocaust. On the flip side, my mother was in Auschwitz during her teenage years, during her entire teenage years, Auschwitz at the end and various other camps, and not fun camps during the other times. My father when he was not trying to see my mother on the outskirts of a camp, was pretending to be German or Italian living in Europe during the war while surviving as a teen. Also, he was a teenager. They didn't leave Europe until 1948 and arrived in the United States in 1958. So they arrived after the war, whereas Bernie's parents arrived before the war. Bernie and I were both born in the United States. Bernie was born 1941. I was born 1958. Bernie apparently lost family members. His father lost family members in the Holocaust, although his father was not living, obviously, in Poland anymore. My parents are survived, had one sister, each of them had one sister that survived, and absent that, their parents, brothers and sisters, etc., all perished during that time. AOC indicated about the losses that Bernie suffered in the Holocaust. In 2016, when Bernie was running for president, he indicated, and I don't know if it's the first time he indicated it, but it seemed to be he was making a big play, and he was also indicating how he was influenced by his Jewish upbringing. But he brought it up in 2016, said his father's family had been lost in the Holocaust. In 2017, and this is what causes me to question some of his intentions. In 2017, in the episode of Finding Your Roots, Bernie appeared with Larry David, and they turned out they had some common relative that they share. And he reacted. And I think it's even stated that he was told for the first time that his father's brother, his uncle, in Poland, died at the hands of the Nazis by standing up. So he was age 75 when he had this first recollection, observation of his family dying in the Holocaust. Even though in 2016, when he was running, he referenced it. In 2017, in a show, he reacts emotionally. I don't know if that was BS. I don't know if he didn't know that before. I don't know if he was staging it. But it caused me concern, the juxtaposition of the dates and his reaction. When describing his upbringing, he indicated that, and he grew up, I think, in Brooklyn. He indicated that when he went to public school and went to Hebrew school on the weekends. Obviously, for Jews, there was no Saturday Hebrew school. So his weekend really was a couple of hours at a Sunday school. I, on the other hand, was tortured to go to Hebrew school, and I understand his disdain for going to Hebrew school, but I was tortured to go, and I went Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. I'm not religious, but that's what I was required to do. But the real difference, what really struck me is when he talked about a tattoo as an observer. He related a story that he would go to the market with his mom and see people who had numbers tattooed on their arms by the Nazis for identification. So in concentration camps, the way the Nazis would keep track of prisoners is they literally would put a tattoo on your forearm in ink, and it would be a numerical tattoo. I don't remember how many numbers. I think there was a letter and then a bunch of numbers. I don't remember specifically. But he was struck by he was struck. He was out walking with his mom. He was a young kid, I guess a young kid, and he saw these numbers. It really caught his attention, and his mom explained that it was something that Hitler had done. Now, what's interesting is for religious Jews, they're not allowed to get tattoos. And if you have a tattoo, you're not allowed to be buried in a religious Jewish cemetery. So, besides being dehumanizing of getting the tattoo itself, on a religious level, it's also impactful, and it may have been used for that reason also. But Bernie indicated that it was really struck by that. And his mother explained to him that Hitler did that. So now I don't know if seeing that traumatized him to the extent that he turned out to be what he turned out to be. Somewhat, I think, of not particularly sensitive to Jewish interests and out there. Obviously, he's off the political spectrum to some degree. And it appears to be that he's disconnected from Jews by what he said. And I felt when he said that about the tattoos, I felt such distance between he and I, because in my household, my mother and all of her friends who were similarly situated had those very same numbers tattooed on their arms from Auschwitz and elsewhere. And rather than frighten me per se, it connected me to my Jewish identity. And that had nothing to do with religion. As religiously as at this point in time, I'd say I'm light and lighter than my parents, and my parents were lighter in the US than outside. Had nothing to do with religion. It had a connection to my heritage. So, notwithstanding his stated intentions, somehow I believe that Bernie Sanders' Jewish roots were shattered. And that defect, I think it is a defect, is projected on the world today. And I find him a destructive force, although probably internally well intentioned. He doesn't always fight for every underdog, he just fights for some. So that's kind of my summary of the protests and my view and with Bernie Sanders. And just to throw it out there, when someone like AOC speaks for another group, I find that completely inappropriate. And I don't think that Bernie Sanders needs her defense. And if he does, at his ripe old age, I think he's 83, maybe it's time to hang him up, Bernie. Anyway, have a good day. Take care. Be well.